The homeless man who returned a CEO's wallet never expected the executive to track him down at the shelter with an offer that would transform both their lives forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story saved just for you, and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story too. The December morning air cut through the cracked windshield of the 2007 Honda Civic like frozen glass, turning Marcus Williams's breath into small clouds that dissipated against the fogged interior. He shifted carefully in the driver's seat, trying not to wake Emma, who lay curled beneath their shared sleeping bag in the back seat, her small frame rising and falling with the labored breathing that had worsened over the past 3 days. The digital clock on the dashboard read 5:47 a.m., and Marcus knew he had perhaps 30 more minutes before the security guard at the 24-hour Walmart would make his rounds and politely but firmly ask them to move along. Marcus rubbed his calloused hands together, blowing warm air between his palms as he studied his daughter's pale face in the rearview mirror. At 8 years old, Emma possessed the kind of resilient spirit that both broke his heart and gave him strength to continue. Even now, sick with what he feared might be pneumonia, she clutched the worn stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was Tooth, only toy they'd managed to keep through the cascade of losses that had brought them to this parking lot in suburban Atlanta. The cough started again, a wet, rattling sound that made Marcus's stomach clench with familiar dread. He'd heard that same cough from his own father 20 years ago, right before the emphysema finally claimed him. Emma's small body shook with the effort, and her eyes fluttered open, immediately seeking his in the mirror with the unconscious trust that had kept him going through the darkest months of their new reality. "Morning, Daddy," she whispered, her voice hoarse but determinedly cheerful. "Is it time to get up?" "Not yet, sweetheart," Marcus replied softly, turning to face her properly. "How are you feeling?" Emma considered this with the serious expression she'd developed recently, as though she understood that their circumstances required careful evaluation of every discomfort. "My chest feels heavy, and it's hard to breathe sometimes, but I'm okay." She paused, then added with the devastating honesty of childhood, "I'm hungry, though." Marcus felt the familiar knife twist of helplessness in his gut. Their food stamps had run out 3 days ago, and his last odd job helping a contractor move drywall had paid just enough to put gas in the tank and buy Emma's prescription cough medicine, which was already running low. The mathematics of survival had become brutally simple. Every dollar spent on food was a dollar not available for the antibiotics Emma clearly needed. Every dollar spent on medicine was a dollar they couldn't use for gas to get to the day labor sites where Marcus might find work. "I know, baby girl. We'll get breakfast in a little bit, okay? Why don't you try to sleep some more?" But Emma was already sitting up, her keen eyes taking in the familiar surroundings of their temporary bedroom. At some point during their 2 months of car living, she had stopped asking when they could go home and had instead developed an almost adult-like acceptance of their nomadic routine. The resilience amazed Marcus, but it also filled him with a grief so profound he sometimes couldn't breathe around it. No 8-year-old should have to adapt to homelessness with such grace. "Can I have some water?" she asked, and Marcus reached for the gallon jug wedged behind the passenger seatone of the few luxuries he insisted on maintaining. Clean water, always. He'd learned that lesson during his childhood in rural Mississippi, where his father had worked construction jobs that took them from town to town, sometimes living in motels, sometimes in their truck, but always with his father's iron rule: clean water, clean clothes when possible, and dignity maintained at all costs. As Emma sipped from the plastic cup, Marcus allowed his mind to drift back 15 months to the morning when everything had started unraveling. He'd been working as a site supervisor for Heartfelt Construction, overseeing a luxury condominium project in Buckhead. The job paid $52,000 annually, not rich by Atlanta standards, but enough to maintain the mortgage on their modest ranch house in Decatur, keep Emma in a good public school, and even save a little for her college fund. That morning had started like any other. Marcus had kissed Emma goodbye as she ate cereal at their kitchen table, her backpack already loaded with homework and the lunch he'd packed the night before. His ex-wife, Denise, was supposed to pick Emma up after school for her weekend visit, one of the few aspects of their divorce that had been working smoothly. The custody arrangement was fair, the house was finally feeling like home again after Denise moved out, and Marcus had begun to believe he was building something stable for his daughter. The accident happened at 10:23 a.m. Marcus remembered the exact time because he'd been checking his watch, calculating how much work the crew could complete before lunch. He'd been inspecting the scaffolding on the building's east side when the improperly secured beam gave way. 47 pounds of steel caught him across the lower back, slamming him against the concrete foundation with enough force to fracture 2 vertebrae and herniate 3 discs. The sound, his own voice crying out in pain and surprise still, echoed in quiet moments. But what haunted him more was the moment in the hospital, 3 days after the accident, when the workers' compensation adjuster had delivered the news with bureaucratic indifference. The investigation had determined that Marcus himself had been partially at fault for the accident, having allegedly failed to follow safety protocols. The claim would be contested. Benefits would be delayed pending review. Meanwhile, the medical bills were accumulating at $1,200 per day. "Daddy?" Emma's voice pulled him back to the present. She was looking at him with the expression of concern that no child should wear when looking at her parent. "You got that sad face again." Marcus forced a smile, reaching back to smooth her tangled curls. "Just thinking about our adventure today. We're going to find some breakfast, and then Daddy's going to look for some work, okay? Can we go to the library again?" Mrs. Patterson said she has new books in the children's section. The public library had become their sanctuary, one of the few places where they could spend hours without being asked to leave or buy something. Emma loved to read, and Marcus was grateful for the free internet access that allowed him to search job listings and fill out applications. The librarians had been kind, never questioning why they arrived each morning when the doors opened and stayed until closing time. "Of course we can go to the library," Marcus assured her, though he knew they'd have to find gas money first. The Honda's fuel gauge hovered just above empty, a constant source of anxiety. Without transportation, he couldn't reach the day labor sites where contractors sometimes hired workers for cash jobs. Emma struggled to pull on her jacket in the cramped space, and Marcus noticed how loose it had become on her small frame. They were both losing weight, but Emma's weight loss was more alarming. At her last school physical, before they'd lost the house and had to withdraw her from Decatur Elementary, she'd weighed 52 pounds. Marcus estimated she'd lost at least 6 pounds since then, weight her small body couldn't afford to lose. The morning routine had become practiced through necessity. Marcus would start the car to warm it up while Emma used the facilities at the gas station across the parking lot. He'd clean up in the restroom after her, using the travel-sized toiletries they'd received from a homeless services organization. Emma would brush her teeth using bottled water, while Marcus tried to make their appearance as normal as possible. The goal was always the same: blend in, avoid drawing attention to their situation, maintain dignity. But this morning, as Emma struggled with a coughing fit that left her gasping, Marcus realized their careful routine was becoming unsustainable. Her illness was worsening, and his pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. "Emma, sweetheart, I think we need to take you to see a doctor today." She looked up at him with eyes that seemed too wise for her age. "We don't have doctor money, Daddy. I remember you saying that." The simple statement hit him harder than the steel beam that had destroyed his back. His 8-year-old daughter was rationing her own healthcare needs because she understood their financial reality better than he wanted her to. "Sometimes," Marcus said carefully, "there are doctors who help people even when they don't have money right away. We can ask about that." As they prepared to leave their overnight sanctuary, Marcus surveyed their possessions. Everything they owned fit in the Honda. 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of Emma's school supplies and books, his construction tools wrapped in canvas, a cooler that rarely contained more than water bottles, and a plastic bin containing important documents: Social Security cards, Emma's birth certificate, his medical records from the accident, and the growing stack of medical bills that had driven them from their home. The divorce papers were in there too, finalized just 6 months before the accident. Denise had remarried quickly, moving to Oregon with her new husband, a software engineer who could provide the stability and financial security that Marcus no longer could. She sent $200 monthly for Emma's support when she remembered, but her new life didn't include room for a sick stepdaughter from her first marriage. The last time Emma had spoken to her mother was 3 weeks ago. A brief phone call where Denise had promised to send money for Christmas gifts but hadn't yet followed through. Marcus started the Honda, grateful when the engine turned over on the first try. The car was ancient by automotive standards, but it had been paid off years ago, and a series of talented mechanics at discount garages had kept it running despite its accumulated wear and tear. It was their home, transportation, and storage unit all in one, and Marcus maintained it with the same careful attention his father had shown to their old Ford pickup during their own nomadic years. As they pulled out of the Walmart parking lot, Emma pressed her face to the window, watching the early morning commuters heading to offices and schoolspeople who had homes to return to at the end of the day, people whose biggest worry might be traffic or a difficult meeting rather than finding food or a safe place to sleep. "Daddy," she said quietly, "do you think we'll have a house again someday?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with hope and fear in equal measure. Marcus had learned to be honest with Emma about their situation while still nurturing her natural optimism. "I believe we will, sweetheart. Sometimes life gets really hard, and we have to be patient while we work our way through the difficult parts. But I'm going to keep trying every single day to make things better for us." "I know you will," Emma replied with such complete faith that Marcus had to blink back tears. "You're the strongest daddy in the whole world." They drove through the awakening city, past coffee shops where people lined up for $5 lattes, past offices where security guards were arriving for day shifts that paid more than Marcus could earn in a week of odd jobs. The inequality felt particularly sharp in the early morning hours, when the divide between the housed and unhoused became most apparent. Marcus had applied for dozens of construction positions, but his injury created complications. He could still work, but not at full capacity. He couldn't lift heavy materials or work on high scaffolding. Most contractors wanted workers who could do everything, and his medical limitations made him a liability concern. The few interviews he'd gotten had ended with polite rejections or promises to keep his resume on file. The day labor site was located behind a Home Depot, where contractors arrived each morning to hire workers for cash jobs. Marcus parked the Honda where Emma could see him through the store's front windows. She'd become expert at entertaining herself with books and drawing supplies, understanding that these periods of waiting were essential to their survival strategy. "I'll be right where you can see me," Marcus assured her, rolling down the window slightly for air circulation despite the cold. "If you need anything, you come get me, okay?" Emma nodded seriously, already reaching for her backpack of activities. "I'll work on my math problems. Mrs. Patterson gave me a workbook yesterday." Marcus walked across the parking lot, joining the dozen other men who waited for work. Some were immigrants sending money to families in other countries. Others were men like himself, fallen through the cracks of the economy, through injury, addiction, or simple bad luck. They greeted each other with the reserved camaraderie of people who understood struggle without needing to discuss it. The first contractor arrived at 6:45, looking for 3 workers to help with a roofing project. Marcus raised his hand but was passed over for younger men without visible limitations. The second contractor needed 2 workers for demolition, heavy work that Marcus's back couldn't handle. By 8:30, only 4 workers remained, and no additional contractors had arrived. "Slow day," commented Jerry, a 50-something man who'd been coming to the site longer than Marcus. Pre-Christmas slump. People holding on to their money until after the holidays. Marcus nodded, fighting down the familiar panic that rose when work didn't materialize. Each day without income meant depleting their already minimal resources. He calculated quickly. They had $37 in cash, a quarter tank of gas, and Emma's cough medicine might last another 2 days if he was careful with the dosage. Walking back to the Honda, Marcus saw Emma through the window, hunched over her workbook with intense concentration. She looked up as he approached, and her face brightened with hope that dimmed when she realized he was returning empty-handed. "No work today?" she asked, trying to hide her disappointment. "Not today, but that just means we have more time for the library," Marcus replied, settling into the driver's seat. "And maybe we can walk around downtown afterward, see the Christmas decorations." Emma smiled, accepting this reframing with the grace that consistently amazed him. As they drove toward the library, she began describing the math problems she'd been working on, her enthusiasm for learning undimmed by their circumstances. Marcus listened, marveling at her resilience while silently calculating how many meals they could skip before her condition became truly dangerous. The Atlanta Public Library central location downtown offered everything they needed: warmth, internet access, clean restrooms, and a children's section where Emma could spend hours immersed in books. Marcus settled at a computer terminal to search job listings, while Emma found her favorite spot near the large windows, surrounded by picture books and chapter books that transported her far from their current reality. The job search had become routine: construction positions that required full physical capability, retail jobs that couldn't accommodate his schedule uncertainty, warehouse work that paid minimum wage and required reliable transportation. Marcus applied methodically, crafting cover letters that emphasized his experience and work ethic while carefully omitting the circumstances that had led to his current situation. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number: "Construction help needed today, cash paid. Meet at 1247 Ponce de Leon, 2 p.m. Marcus stared at the message, hope and suspicion warring in his mind. Legitimate contractors rarely recruited through random text messages, but his desperation made him willing to investigate opportunities he might normally ignore. "Emma," he called softly, "I might have found some work for this afternoon. Would you be okay staying here with Mrs. Patterson while I check it out?" Mrs. Patterson, the children's librarian, had become an unofficial ally in their struggle. She never asked direct questions about their situation, but she often found reasons to offer Emma snacks or to suggest quiet activities during the library's slower hours. Emma looked up from her book, considering the proposal seriously. "Will you be safe, Daddy?" The question revealed how much she understood about their precarious situation. 8-year-olds in stable homes didn't worry about their parents' safety during work hours. "I'll be very careful," Marcus promised. "And I'll call you every hour to check in." The construction site was a half-renovated warehouse in an industrial district, where a man named Rodriguez was coordinating repairs after a pipe burst had damaged the interior. The work was legitimate: removing water-damaged drywall and preparing surfaces for new installation. Rodriguez paid fair wages and didn't ask questions about documentation or background checks. For 6 hours, Marcus swung a sledgehammer and hauled debris, his back protesting but holding up well enough to complete the job. The pain hit him during the drive back to the library, a sharp burning sensation that radiated down his left leg. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, breathing deeply until the spasm passed. The injury would never fully heal without proper medical treatment and physical therapy, luxuries that remained beyond their reach. But $120 in cash meant food for Emma, gas for the car, and possibly enough left over for more cough medicine. Emma was waiting in the children's section, surrounded by books she'd selected for their evening reading time. Her pale complexion worried Marcus, but she greeted him with such genuine happiness at his return that he managed to push his concerns aside momentarily. "Did you have a good day, Daddy?" "Very good," Marcus replied honestly, patting the cash in his pocket. "Good enough that we can get dinner and maybe some groceries." They stopped at a discount grocery store, where Marcus carefully selected items that would provide maximum nutrition for minimal cost. Canned soup, whole grain bread, peanut butter, bananas, and milk made up the bulk of their purchases. Emma wanted to help carry bags, but Marcus noticed how quickly she became winded from minor exertion. As they ate dinner in the car soup, heated in the store's microwave, Emma asked the question that had been building throughout their months of instability. "Daddy, why did our life get so hard?" Marcus set down his soup container, considering how to answer truthfully without burdening her with adult complexities she wasn't ready to understand. Sometimes bad things happen that aren't anybody's fault, he began carefully. I got hurt at work, and that made it hard to do my job the same way. When I couldn't work as much, we couldn't keep our house. Mom had to make decisions about what was best for her new family. None of it happened because anyone did anything wrong. Sometimes life just gets complicated. Emma nodded thoughtfully. Like when Mrs. Rodriguez's house got hit by a tree in that storm, and her family had to move in with her sister? Exactly like that, Marcus agreed, grateful for her ability to find parallels that made sense of their situation. But Mrs. Rodriguez got a new house after the insurance money came. Will we get a new house too? The innocent question pierced him. Mrs. Rodriguez had homeowners insurance, family support, and stable employment. Her displacement was temporary. Their situation felt increasingly permanent. We're working toward that, Marcus said finally. Every day, we're working toward that. As night fell, they returned to their parking lot sanctuary behind the Walmart. Marcus had discovered that stores with 24-hour operations were more tolerant of overnight parking, especially if he made small purchases and maintained a low profile. Emma settled into her makeshift bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit and the new library book she'd chosen. "Daddy," she said drowsily, "I love you more than all the stars in the sky." The phrase was from a picture book they'd read together years ago, back when she had her own bedroom, and nighttime meant stories in a real bed with clean sheets, and the security of knowing tomorrow would bring breakfast and school and all the predictable rhythms of a stable life. "I love you more than all the stars in the sky, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." But as Emma's breathing settled into sleep patterns interrupted by periodic coughing, Marcus lay awake staring at the car's cloth ceiling, calculating and recalculating their resources. The 120 from today's work minus groceries and gas left them with 73. Emma's cough was worsening, and the free clinic had waiting lists that stretched for weeks. Winter was arriving, and the Honda's heater worked sporadically. Christmas was 3 weeks away, and Emma still believed in the magic of the holiday despite their circumstances. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering his father's words from years ago. "Son, sometimes a man has to swallow his pride and accept help when his child's welfare is at stake. There's no shame in doing what's necessary for family." Tomorrow, he decided, he would swallow his pride. He would take Emma to the emergency room regardless of their inability to pay. He would apply for every assistance program available, regardless of the paperwork and bureaucracy involved. He would ask for help from churches, charities, and social services, all the resources he'd been avoiding in his determination to solve their problems independently. As he drifted toward restless sleep, Marcus couldn't possibly know that in 18 hours he would find a wallet containing 47 in cash money that could solve all their immediate problems if he chose to keep it. He couldn't know that his decision in that moment would change not only Emma's life, but his own in ways he couldn't imagine. For now, there was only tomorrow's promise of another day spent trying to build stability from chaos, one small victory at a time, powered by a father's love and an 8-year-old's unwavering faith in her daddy's strength. The wind picked up outside their temporary home, rattling the Honda's windows, and reminding them both of how thin the barriers were between them and the elements, between their fragile family unit and a world that seemed increasingly indifferent to their struggle. The morning sun cast long shadows between Atlanta's downtown skyscrapers as Marcus guided the Honda through streets that hummed with the energy of commerce and ambition. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, her breathing labored but her eyes bright with curiosity as they passed the gleaming office towers where people in crisp suits hurried along sidewalks with purposeful strides. The contrast between their world and this one had never felt more stark. "Look at that building, Daddy," Emma whispered, pointing to a 40-story glass monument that reflected the morning light like a mirror. "It's so tall, it probably touches the clouds." Marcus followed her gaze, remembering when such buildings had represented possibility rather than intimidation. Before the accident, before the medical bills, before their slide into this netherworld between stability and desperation, he had walked these same streets as a project supervisor, carrying blueprints and wearing a hard hat that commanded respect from subcontractors and clients alike. Maybe someday you'll work in a building like that?" he said, parking near a small municipal lot where the day rate was manageable. "You're smart enough to do anything you set your mind to." Emma smiled, though the expression was interrupted by another coughing fit that left her gripping the dashboard for support. Marcus reached over to rub her back, feeling the heat radiating through her thin jacket. Her fever had worsened overnight, and the rattle in her chest sounded deeper, more concerning than it had just yesterday. "I'm okay," she insisted, as she always did, straightening up with visible effort. "Are you going to clean windows today?" "That's the plan." Marcus gathered his supplies from the trunk: a plastic bucket, several squeegees in various sizes, a bottle of cleaning solution he'd mixed himself from dish soap and vinegar, and a collection of microfiber cloths donated by a church group. Window cleaning wasn't skilled labor, but it was work he could perform despite his back injury, and the foot traffic downtown meant potential customers throughout the business district. "Can I help?" Emma asked, already knowing the answer, but hoping anyway. "Your job is to rest and get better," Marcus replied gently. "I'll be right there where you can see me, and if you need anything at all, you come get me immediately, okay?" He'd positioned the car strategically across from a small park where Emma could watch him work while remaining in a relatively safe environment. The downtown foot traffic included police patrols, which provided some security, and the nearby business district meant public restrooms and places to buy water if necessary. Marcus kissed Emma's forehead, noting again how warm her skin felt. "I love you, sweetheart. Try to sleep if you can." "I love you too, Daddy. Make lots of money today." The casual optimism in her voice nearly broke his composure. As he crossed the street with his cleaning supplies, Marcus calculated their resources for perhaps the 100th time since waking. Yesterday's construction work had provided a temporary reprieve, but their cash reserves remained dangerously low. Emma needed medicine they couldn't afford, food they were rationing, and medical attention that seemed increasingly urgent with each passing hour. The first business owner he approached, a coffee shop manager, declined his services politely but offered him a day-old pastry for Emma. The small kindness restored some of his faith in human nature while simultaneously reminding him of how visible their desperation had become. When people began offering food unprompted, it meant their situation was obvious to strangers. His second potential customer, the manager of a small accounting firm, agreed to let him clean their storefront windows for $20. As Marcus mixed his cleaning solution in the bucket, he caught his reflection in the glass and was startled by what he saw. His face had grown gaunt over the past weeks, his clothes hung loose despite his efforts to maintain appearances, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. "Focus on the work," he told himself, applying solution to the first window panel. The familiar motions of the squeegee provided a meditative rhythm that allowed his mind to quiet the constant anxiety about their circumstances. Window cleaning required precision and attention to detail, skills that translated from his construction background. As he worked, Marcus observed the ebb and flow of downtown Atlanta's business district. Men and women emerged from expensive cars and ride-shares, carrying briefcases and talking urgently into phones about meetings and deadlines. Many clutched coffee cups that cost more than he and Emma spent on food in a day. The disparity no longer made him bitter. It simply highlighted the randomness of fortune and the thin line between stability and disaster. By noon, he had earned $68 cleaning windows for 4 different businesses. The money represented more than many people spent on a single restaurant meal, but for Marcus and Emma, it meant groceries for several days and possibly enough left over to refill Emma's prescription. He was calculating whether to approach one more potential customer when he noticed the wallet. It lay partially hidden beneath a newspaper stand at the corner of Peachtree and 5th Street, expensive leather gleaming despite the shadow cast by the metal structure. Marcus almost walked past, assuming someone would return for it shortly, but something about the wallet's positioning suggested it had been there for more than just a few minutes. The morning's foot traffic would have kicked it around if it had been dropped recently. Marcus glanced around the intersection, looking for anyone who might be searching for lost items. A businessman hurried past, checking his phone. 2 women in professional attire discussed lunch plans as they waited for the crosswalk signal. No one appeared to be missing anything important. He bent down and retrieved the wallet, immediately recognizing the quality of the leather and craftsmanship. This wasn't a $20 wallet from a discount store. It was the kind of accessory that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. The weight surprised him, not just the leather itself, but the substantial contents within. Marcus opened the wallet carefully, intending to find identification so he could locate the owner. What he discovered instead made his breath catch in his throat and his hands tremble with sudden adrenaline. Cash, stacks of it. $100 bills arranged in neat bundles that filled the wallet's main compartment. Marcus stood frozen on the busy sidewalk, staring at more money than he had seen since his construction supervisor days. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing, automatically beginning to count, even as part of him insisted this couldn't be real. 100, 200, 500, 1,000. The numbers climbed as Marcus's heart rate accelerated. 2,000, 3,000, 5,000. People walked past him on the sidewalk, absorbed in their own lives, unaware that he held what might be the solution to every problem that had plagued his family for months. When he reached the final count, $47,000, Marcus closed the wallet quickly and looked around again, suddenly paranoid that someone was watching him, testing him, waiting to see what he would do. The cash was real. The wallet was real. And somewhere, someone was probably having the worst day of their life, realizing they had lost $47,000 in downtown Atlanta. Marcus returned to his cleaning supplies, sitting down heavily on a bus stop bench while his mind raced. With shaking hands, he reopened the wallet to examine the identification. The driver's license bore the photo and information for Victoria Chen, age 41, with an address in Buckhead's most exclusive neighborhood. Below the license, Marcus found several credit cards, all platinum or black, the kind reserved for people with unlimited spending capacity. But it was the business card tucked behind the credit cards that made Marcus understand exactly whose wallet he held. Victoria Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Chen Industries. The address listed a building just 6 blocks from where he sat, one of those gleaming towers Emma had admired that morning. Marcus pulled out his phone and quickly searched for Chen Industries, his hands still trembling as he navigated to the company's website. Victoria Chen's professional photograph gazed back at him from the screen, an attractive Asian American woman with intelligent eyes and the kind of confident smile that suggested she was accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. The company biography described her as a self-made entrepreneur who had built Chen Industries from a small import business into a multinational corporation specializing in sustainable technology solutions. Net worth estimated at $340 million. The information hit Marcus like a physical blow. He was holding the equivalent of several years' salary from someone whose daily income probably exceeded what most people made in a month. For Victoria Chen, $47,000 might be significant, but it wouldn't threaten her housing, her health care, or her family's basic survival. For Marcus and Emma, it would change everything. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the bench, allowing himself to imagine what the money could do. First, immediate medical care for Emma. No more waiting lists at free clinics, no more rationing medication, no more lying awake at night listening to her labored breathing and wondering if he was failing as a father. Emergency room visits, specialists, whatever tests and treatments she needed to recover completely. Housing. A real apartment with heat that worked consistently, where Emma could have her own bedroom again, where they could cook proper meals and maintain the kind of routine that children needed. Security deposits, first month's rent, utilities connected in his name, all the basic requirements of normal life that had become impossible dreams. Transportation, repairs for the Honda, or perhaps even a more reliable vehicle. Gas money that didn't require daily calculation. The ability to search for work beyond walking distance from their parking spaces. Emma's education. Private school if necessary, tutoring to help her catch up on the learning time she'd lost, supplies and clothes and all the things that would help her feel normal again. College savings, the fund he'd once maintained before medical bills consumed every available dollar. His own recovery, Physical therapy for his back injury, the kind of comprehensive treatment that might actually heal him instead of merely managing pain. Retraining if necessary, certifications that would make him more employable, the chance to rebuild a career instead of surviving one day at a time. The fantasy was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Marcus opened his eyes and looked across the street where Emma waited in the Honda, probably working on math problems or reading one of her library books, trusting completely that her daddy would find a way to take care of her. He could walk to the car, drive to a bank, deposit the money, and solve their problems permanently. Victoria Chen would report the loss to her credit card companies and insurance. For someone with her resources, it would be an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. She would recover. She had systems and safety nets and wealth that protected her from the kind of desperation that now consumed Marcus's thoughts. The rationalization felt logical, almost moral in its calculus of relative need versus relative impact. He was a good father in an impossible situation. Emma was an innocent child whose health was deteriorating because of their circumstances. Victoria Chen was wealthy enough to absorb this loss without meaningful damage to her life or business. But even as Marcus constructed these arguments, he could hear another voice in his mind, his father's voice, weathered by years of hard labor and harder choices, speaking the lessons that had shaped Marcus's understanding of right and wrong. The memory came flooding back with startling clarity. Marcus was 12 years old, working alongside his father on a residential construction project in rural Mississippi. They were installing drywall in a new subdivision when Marcus found a wallet that had fallen from one of the other workers' tool belts. The wallet contained $300, a fortune to the Williams family at that time, representing nearly a month's worth of groceries and utilities. "Daddy, look what I found," Marcus had said, showing his father the cash. His father had stopped working immediately, setting down his tools and taking the wallet with hands that were permanently stained with sawdust and paint. He'd examined the identification, then looked at his son with an expression Marcus would never forget. "Son, I know we need this money. Lord knows we need it more than most, but this wallet doesn't belong to us, and that makes it theft if we keep it. I don't care how badly we need it or how much good we think we could do with it. It's not ours." "But Daddy, we could pay the electric bill, and maybe get groceries that aren't from the food bank, and you could fix the truck's transmission." His father had smiled sadly, understanding the temptation because he felt it too. "Marcus, let me tell you something about integrity. It's not about doing the right thing when it's easy or convenient. It's about doing the right thing when it costs you something important, when it hurts. When it means staying poor instead of getting rich, staying hungry instead of eating well." They had returned the wallet to its owner, who had been frantic with worry about the lost money. The man had offered a $20 reward, which Marcus's father had initially refused, before accepting it graciously, understanding that the gesture of gratitude was important to the wallet's owner. "Remember this day," his father had told Marcus as they drove home in their deteriorating pickup truck. "Remember that we chose character over comfort. That's the kind of men we are. That's the kind of man I'm raising you to be." The memory was so vivid that Marcus could almost smell the sawdust and hear the sound of his father's voice. Even now, 22 years later, those words carried the weight of absolute moral authority. His father had died when Marcus was 19, but his teachings had shaped every major decision of Marcus's adult life, including his marriage to Denise, when he'd chosen love over financial practicality, including his decision to pursue construction supervision rather than easier but less fulfilling work, including his insistence on maintaining their dignity even in homelessness, refusing offers that came with degrading conditions or requirements. Marcus looked at the wallet again, then across the street at Emma. She had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, her small body curled uncomfortably in a space too small for proper rest. Her face was flushed with fever, and even from this distance, he could see the rise and fall of her labored breathing. The internal struggle intensified. His father's lessons had been delivered during a different kind of povertistable poverty, if such a thing existed. They had been poor, but they'd had a home, regular meals, and access to basic health care. They hadn't been living in a car, watching a child's health deteriorate while lacking resources to address it. Would his father have made the same choice if Marcus had been dying? Would integrity matter more than his child's life? But even as he formulated these questions, Marcus knew the answers. His father's integrity hadn't been conditional or situational. It had been absolute, a core principle that didn't bend based on circumstances or needs. The man who had taught him to return that wallet wouldn't have made an exception, even for his son's life. Character over comfort, Marcus whispered to himself, the words feeling both familiar and foreign in his current circumstances. He pulled out his phone again and looked up the address for Chen Industries. The building was a 20-minute walk from his current location, close enough to return the wallet before Victoria Chen might even realize it was missing. Close enough to do the right thing before temptation could erode his resolve further. Marcus gathered his window cleaning supplies and walked back to the Honda, his decision crystallizing with each step. Emma woke as he opened the driver's door, looking up at him with drowsy confusion. "Are we leaving already, Daddy? Did you make enough money?" "We need to make a quick stop," Marcus said, starting the engine. "I found something that belongs to someone else, and we need to return it." Emma accepted this explanation without question, as she had learned to accept most of the day's unexpected developments. As they drove through downtown Atlanta toward the Chen Industries building, Marcus felt a strange combination of peace and terror. Peace, because he was honoring his father's teachings and maintaining the integrity that defined his character. Terror, because he was choosing principle over the practical solution to their most desperate needs. The Chen Industries building rose 43 stories into the Atlanta skyline, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun with an almost blinding intensity. Marcus parked in a visitor space and studied the building's intimidating entrance, where security guards and marble surfaces spoke of wealth and power that existed in a different universe from his daily experience. "Is this where the wallet person works?" Emma asked, following his gaze upward. "Yes. Her name is Victoria Chen, and she's the boss of this whole building." Emma considered this information seriously. "She must be very important." "She is. And she's probably worried about losing her wallet." As they approached the building's entrance, Marcus felt increasingly out of place. His work clothes and cleaning supplies marked him as someone who didn't belong in this environment, and he could see security guards evaluating him with professional wariness. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers spoke of a world where $47,000 might be a rounding error rather than a life-changing sum. But there was no turning back now. Marcus approached the security desk, wallet in hand, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether he remained the kind of man his father had tried to raise, or whether desperation would finally compromise the principles that had guided his life. "Excuse me," he said to the security guard, a professional-looking woman in her 50s. "I found this wallet on the street, and it belongs to Victoria Chen. I'd like to return it to her." The guard examined the wallet, then Marcus himself, her expression shifting from suspicion to surprise as she realized he was voluntarily returning something of obvious value. "You found this, and brought it here to return it?" "Yes, ma'am. It has her business card inside, so I knew where to bring it." The guard opened the wallet briefly, undoubtedly noting the substantial cash contents, then looked at Marcus with something approaching respect. "That's unusual. Most people would have." She didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. Most people in his situation would have kept the money. "It's not mine," Marcus said simply. "It belongs to Ms. Chen." As the guard made phone calls to arrange for the wallet's return to its owner, Marcus stood in the gleaming lobby and felt the weight of his decision settling into permanence. He had chosen integrity over immediate relief, character over comfort, just as his father had taught him. Walking back to the Honda, where Emma waited with patient trust, Marcus wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of their lives or the most important decision of his character. The wallet was gone, the money was gone, and their problems remained exactly as urgent as they had been that morning. But as he looked at his daughter's face, fevered but peaceful, trusting but not demanding, Marcus knew that whatever happened next, she would grow up knowing that her father had chosen to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. That lesson, he realized, might be worth more than $47,000. It would have to be. The lobby of Chen Industries existed in a realm that seemed to operate by different physical laws than the world Marcus knew. 30-foot ceilings soared overhead, supported by marble columns that gleamed under the light of crystal chandeliers imported, according to a small plaque, from Austria. The floor beneath his worn work boots was polished to a mirror finish, reflecting his image back at him with uncomfortable clarity. Everything about the space whispered of money, power, and the kind of success that existed in financial magazines rather than real life. Marcus felt the security guard's eyes tracking his movement as he approached the reception desk, his cleaning supplies and weathered appearance marking him as distinctly out of place among the gleaming surfaces and perfectly dressed professionals who moved through the lobby with purposeful strides. A woman in an expensive suit brushed past him, her heels clicking against the marble with staccato precision, her phone pressed to her ear as she discussed market projections in numbers that exceeded Marcus's annual income during his best years. "Sir, can I help you?" The receptionist's voice carried the practiced politeness of someone trained to handle unwanted visitors diplomatically. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with perfectly styled hair and makeup that had probably taken an hour to apply. Her smile was professional but cautious, her eyes already moving toward the security station as she evaluated whether Marcus represented a potential problem. "I found a wallet that belongs to Victoria Chen," Marcus said, placing the leather wallet on the marble counter between them. "I'd like to return it to her." The receptionist's eyebrows rose slightly as she recognized the expensive wallet, her expression shifting from wariness to confusion. "You found this?" "About 2 hours ago, near the corner of Peachtree and Fifth. It has her identification and business cards inside." Behind the reception desk, Marcus could see the young woman's mind working, trying to reconcile his appearance with the voluntary return of what was obviously valuable property. She opened the wallet briefly, her eyes widening as she caught sight of the cash contents, then looked back at Marcus with something approaching disbelief. "You brought this here to return it to Miss Chen?" "Yes, ma'am. It belongs to her." The receptionist glanced toward the security desk, where the female guard Marcus had spoken to earlier was watching the interaction with professional interest. After a brief internal debate visible on her features, she picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "Ms. Chen? There's a gentleman here in the lobby who says he found your wallet." "Yes, ma'am, he brought it here to return it." "No, ma'am, he hasn't asked for anything." "Yes, I can see that it appears to be intact." Marcus stood patiently during the conversation, increasingly aware of how his presence was drawing attention from other people in the lobby. A group of men in expensive suits had paused their conversation to observe him with undisguised curiosity. 2 women, emerging from the elevator bank, slowed their pace to stare at the unusual scene of someone voluntarily returning lost property in corporate America. "Miss Chen will see you," the receptionist said after ending her call, her tone now carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there initially. "Please take the express elevator to the 43rd floor. Miss Chen's assistant will meet you there." The elevator ride to the 43rd floor felt like traveling to another planet. Marcus watched the floor numbers climb steadily, each digit representing a level of success and influence that seemed increasingly remote from his daily reality. Through the elevator's glass walls, he could see the sprawling city of Atlanta spread out below, the streets where he and Emma struggled for survival transformed into an abstract pattern of lights and movement. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that somehow managed to be even more intimidating than the lobby. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, while contemporary art that probably cost more than most people's houses adorned the walls. The furniture appeared to have been designed by architects rather than purchased from stores, each piece a statement of aesthetic sophistication and financial resources. "Mr. Williams?" A woman in her 30s approached him, her manner brisk but not unkind. "I'm Sarah Martinez, Miss Chen's executive assistant. She's very eager to meet you." Marcus followed Sarah down a hallway lined with awards, photographs of Victoria Chen with various dignitaries and business leaders, and framed articles from major publications chronicling her company's success. The images told the story of a woman who had built something extraordinary from nothing, who commanded respect in rooms where decisions affecting millions of people were made daily. "Just so you know," Sarah said quietly as they walked, "Ms. Chen is intense. She's brilliant and fair, but she doesn't have patience for games or deception. She appreciates directness." "I'm just here to return her wallet," Marcus replied, though he appreciated the warning. Sarah knocked on massive double doors, made from what appeared to be exotic wood, then opened them to reveal an office that defied Marcus's ability to process fully. The space was enormous, with seating areas that could accommodate formal meetings, a conference table that could seat 20 people, and floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look like a personal possession. But it was the woman behind the desk who commanded immediate attention. Victoria Chen was smaller than Marcus had expected from her photographs, perhaps 5'4" in heels, but her presence filled the enormous office with an energy that was immediately apparent. She was beautiful, in the way of women who had never doubted their own capabilities, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once and sharp features that suggested both determination and wit. Her black hair was pulled back in a style that was elegant but practical, and her navy blue suit was clearly expensive but not ostentatious. She stood as Marcus entered, moving from behind her desk with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every situation she encountered. Her eyes went immediately to the wallet in his hands, then to his face, studying him with an intensity that felt almost physical. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of childhood spent speaking another language. "I understand you found my wallet and brought it here to return it." "Yes, ma'am." Marcus stepped forward, offering the wallet. "I found it near a newspaper stand downtown. Everything appears to be there." Victoria took the wallet but didn't immediately open it, continuing to study Marcus with those penetrating dark eyes. "You looked inside?" "Only to find identification so I could return it to you." "And you saw the contents?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Yes, ma'am." $47,000 in cash." "Yes, ma'am." Victoria opened the wallet and quickly counted through the bills, her movements efficient and practiced. When she finished, she looked up at Marcus again, her expression unreadable. "It's all here, every dollar." She paused, clearly struggling with something. "Mr. Williams, I have to ask, please don't take offense, but why? In your situation, why would you return this money?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with assumptions about Marcus's circumstances that were probably accurate but still stung. He realized that his appearance, his work clothes, his cleaning supplies had all told Victoria Chen a story about his financial situation that made his honesty seem inexplicable. "Because it's not mine," Marcus said simply. "It belongs to you." "But surely." Victoria gestured vaguely, clearly grappling with the mathematics of the situation. "This money could solve problems for you. Significant problems." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, embarrassed by how transparent his desperation must be. "My father taught me that integrity isn't conditional. It doesn't depend on how much you need something, or how much good you think you could do with it. Wrong is wrong, regardless of circumstances." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. She moved to one of the seating areas near the windows, gesturing for Marcus to join her. "Please, sit. I'd like to talk with you for a few minutes." Marcus remained standing, uncomfortable with the idea of sitting in furniture that probably cost more than he'd made in the past 6 months. "Ma'am, I just came to return your wallet. I should get back to my daughter." "Your daughter?" Victoria's voice sharpened with interest. "How old is she?" 8. She's waiting in the car downstairs." "She's sick," Victoria observed, reading something in Marcus's expression or posture that he hadn't realized he was telegraphing. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "She needs medicine I can't afford. But that's not your problem." "Sit down, please." Victoria's tone carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, but there was kindness there, too. 5 minutes of your time, and then I'll let you get back to your daughter." Marcus reluctantly took a seat in a chair that was more comfortable than any furniture he'd ever owned, acutely aware of how out of place he looked in this environment. Victoria settled across from him, her posture relaxed but her eyes still intensely focused. "Tell me about your father," she said unexpectedly. "Ma'am? You mentioned that your father taught you about integrity. What did he do?" Marcus felt himself relax slightly at the familiar subject. Construction. He worked on houses, mostly, sometimes commercial buildings. We moved around a lot when I was young, following jobs. He was a good man. Honest. He died when I was 19. Victoria nodded slowly. My father died when I was 12. He was a factory worker in San Francisco. Came here from Taiwan with nothing but determination and a belief that America would give his children opportunities he never had. She paused, looking out the window at the city below. He worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, sending money back to my grandmother while saving for our education. He never lived to see me graduate from high school, much less build this company. The revelation surprised Marcus. Despite her obvious wealth and power, there was genuine emotion in Victoria's voice when she spoke of her father. It occurred to him that they shared something fundamental, despite the enormous differences in their current circumstances. "I'm sorry for your loss," Marcus said, meaning it. "He taught me something very similar to what your father taught you," Victoria continued. "That character matters more than comfort. That how you treat people when you have nothing reveals who you really are when you have everything." She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "I think he would have liked you, Mr. Williams." Marcus didn't know how to respond to that, so he remained silent. Victoria reached into her desk drawer and withdrew a checkbook, her movements decisive. "I insist on offering you a reward for returning my wallet." "That's not necessary," Marcus said quickly, standing up. "I didn't return it for a reward." "I know you didn't. That's exactly why you deserve one." Victoria began writing, her pen moving across the check with practiced strokes. $10,000 seems appropriate for this level of honesty. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. $10,000 would solve their immediate problems: Emma's medicine, food, temporary housing, possibly even enough left over to get his back properly treated. But accepting it felt wrong somehow, like it would diminish the integrity of his original decision. "Miss Chen, I can't accept that much money." Victoria looked up from the check, surprised. "Why not? You've earned it." "I returned your wallet because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected payment. Taking that much money would make it feel like a transaction rather than the right choice." Victoria set down her pen, studying Marcus with renewed intensity. "How much would your daughter's medicine cost?" The direct question caught Marcus off guard. "About $60 for a 2-week supply of antibiotics." "And you don't have $60. Marcus felt his pride warring with desperation, the familiar battle that had defined so many interactions over the past months. "No, ma'am, not at the moment." Victoria tore up the $10,000 check and wrote a new one, this time for $100. "Medicine for your daughter, and maybe a decent meal. Will you accept that?" Marcus stared at the check, understanding that Victoria was offering him a way to maintain his dignity while still helping his child. The amount was substantial enough to make a real difference, but small enough that it felt like genuine gratitude rather than charity. "Yes, ma'am, thank you." As Marcus took the check, Victoria's fingers briefly touched his, and he was surprised by the warmth of her skin. For just a moment, the enormous differences between their worlds seemed less significant than the recognition that passed between them two people who had been shaped by loss and taught to value character above convenience. "Mr. Williams," Victoria said, as Marcus prepared to leave, "what kind of work are you looking for?" "Construction, ideally. I was a site supervisor before I got injured. But I'm willing to do anything honest that pays fairly." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "I may have some opportunities within my company. Would you be interested in discussing possibilities?" Marcus felt a flutter of hope that he quickly suppressed. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't want you to feel obligated because I returned your wallet." "That's not why I'm asking." Victoria moved to her desk and retrieved a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to Marcus. "I'm asking because in 20 years of business, I've learned that character is the rarest and most valuable commodity in the corporate world. People with your integrity are exactly what companies like mine need. Marcus looked at the business card, noting that Victoria had written her direct phone number on the back, along with a note. Call Monday morning, VC. I don't understand. You don't know anything about my work experience or qualifications. Victoria smiled, and for the first time since he'd entered her office, the expression seemed completely natural rather than professional. Williams, you just voluntarily returned $47,000 in cash that could have solved every problem in your life. You did it because your father taught you that integrity matters more than comfort. In my experience, everything else can be taught, but character like yours is either there or it isn't. As Marcus left Victoria's office, her business card carefully tucked into his wallet beside the check for $100, he felt disoriented by the encounter. What had begun as a simple wallet return had evolved into something he couldn't quite define: a connection with someone whose world seemed impossibly distant from his own, yet who had somehow recognized something in him that he'd almost forgotten existed. The elevator ride down 43 floors felt different this time, less like descent than like a gradual return to reality. In the lobby, the same security guards and perfectly dressed professionals moved through their daily routines, but Marcus no longer felt entirely invisible among them. Victoria Chen had seen him, really seen him in a way that most people in his current circumstances didn't bother to do. Outside, the Atlanta afternoon sun felt warm on his face as he walked back to the Honda where Emma waited. She looked up as he opened the driver's door, her fevered eyes immediately focusing on his expression. "Did you find the wallet, lady?" she asked. "I did. Her name is Victoria Chen, and she was very grateful to get her wallet back." Emma smiled, then noticed the check in Marcus's hand. "Did she give you a reward?" "A small one. Enough for your medicine and dinner somewhere nice." "Really?" Emma's excitement was immediate and genuine, the kind of unrestrained joy that only children could express over simple pleasures. "Can we get pizza and my medicine today?" "We can get both," Marcus assured her, starting the engine. "And maybe even ice cream for dessert." As they drove away from the gleaming tower that housed Chen Industries, Marcus found himself repeatedly glancing at Victoria's business card. The weight of possibility it represented felt both thrilling and terrifying. He had no idea what kind of opportunities Victoria might have in mind, or whether her offer was genuine, or simply an impulse born of gratitude that she would later reconsider. But for the first time in months, the future seemed to contain possibilities beyond mere survival. The check in his wallet would solve their immediate crisis, and the business card might represent something even more valuable: a chance to rebuild rather than simply endure. At the pharmacy, as Marcus watched Emma's face light up when the pharmacist confirmed they could fill her prescription immediately, he thought about Victoria's words regarding character and integrity. He had made the right choice in returning the wallet, not just because his father's teachings had demanded it, but because maintaining his integrity had opened a door he never could have anticipated. That evening, as they shared pizza in a real restaurant for the first time in months, and Emma's breathing began to sound clearer after her first dose of antibiotics, Marcus allowed himself to hope that their long journey through desperation might finally be approaching an end. The business card in his wallet felt like a lifeline, though he couldn't shake the feeling that Monday morning's phone call would either change their lives completely or prove that some doors remained closed to people like him, regardless of their character. Either way, he had chosen integrity over immediate gain, and whatever came next would build on that foundation. As Emma fell asleep in the Honda that night, her breathing easier for the first time in weeks, Marcus studied the city lights through the windshield and wondered what Victoria Chen was doing at that moment in her world of marble and crystal, whether she was thinking about their encounter, and whether the opportunity she had hinted at could possibly be real. He would find out Monday morning. Until then, he would hold on to the hope that doing the right thing might finally lead to something better than mere survival. The Covenant House shelter on Ponce de Leon Avenue existed in a state of controlled chaos that Marcus had come to understand and navigate over the past week. Friday afternoon brought the usual influx of families seeking weekend refuge from Atlanta's increasingly hostile streets, their possessions crammed into shopping carts and garbage bags, their children clinging to parents with the wide-eyed wariness of those who had learned too young that safety was temporary and comfort was a luxury. Marcus sat at one of the scarred plastic tables in the communal dining area, helping Emma with her mathematics homework, while the familiar sounds of institutional life echoed around them. Children cried, adults argued in hushed tones with caseworkers, and the industrial air conditioning system cycled on and off with mechanical precision that reminded everyone this was a way station rather than a home. "Daddy, I don't understand this problem," Emma said, pointing to a word problem about calculating the area of a rectangular garden. Her voice carried the patient frustration of a child who took her education seriously despite circumstances that made concentration nearly impossible. Marcus leaned closer, studying the problem while simultaneously monitoring the room for potential trouble. 3 days at the shelter had taught him which residents to avoid, which staff members genuinely cared about their clients, and how to position himself and Emma in spaces that offered both visibility and protection. "Let's see," he said, pointing to the numbers in the textbook. "If the garden is 12 feet long and 8 feet wide, what operation do we need to use to find the area?" Emma's brow furrowed in concentration, her lips moving silently as she worked through the logic. Despite everything they had endured, her intellectual curiosity remained undimmed. The shelter's educational coordinator had been amazed by Emma's academic level, noting that she was performing above grade level in every subject despite months of disrupted schooling. "Multiplication," Emma said finally, her face brightening with understanding. 12 times 8 equals 96 square feet. "Perfect," Marcus said, kissing the top of her head. "You're getting good at these." The mathematics came easily to Emma, but Marcus worried about the other lessons she was absorbing in their current environment. Yesterday, she had asked why some of the older children at the shelter seemed angry all the time. This morning, she had inquired about why Mrs. Rodriguez from the next cot over cried herself to sleep each night. These were questions no 8-year-old should need to ask, realities no child should have to process. "Mr. Williams?" A voice interrupted his thoughts, and Marcus looked up to see Sandra, one of the shelter's social workers, approaching their table with an expression he couldn't quite read. "There's someone here to see you." Marcus felt his stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. Official visitors usually meant complications creditors, government agencies, or legal issues stemming from their financial collapse. "What kind of someone?" "A businesswoman. She says she knows you." Sandra's tone carried curiosity tinged with suspicion. In her experience, successful business people didn't typically seek out homeless shelter residents for social visits. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities, but only one seemed remotely plausible. "Did she give you her name?" "Victoria Chen. She's waiting in the family meeting room." Emma looked up from her homework, her eyes bright with interest. "Is that the wallet lady, Daddy? The one with the tall building?" "I think so, sweetheart." Marcus gathered their materials, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to process why Victoria Chen would have tracked him down at a homeless shelter. Their Monday morning phone call had gone unanswered. He had tried to reach her office, but had been redirected to voicemail. And his subsequent attempts had met with the polite but firm barriers that protected successful executives from unwanted contact. The family meeting room was a small space, designed for privacy during difficult conversations between residents and caseworkers. Victoria Chen sat at the rectangular table, looking strangely out of place amid the institutional furniture and motivational posters. She wore a charcoal gray business suit that probably cost more than most shelter residents saw in 6 months, but her expression was focused and serious rather than uncomfortable. She stood as Marcus and Emma entered, her eyes immediately going to Emma with the kind of intense attention that suggested genuine interest rather than polite acknowledgement. "Mr. Williams," Victoria said, extending her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Miss Chen." Marcus shook her hand, acutely aware of the calluses and stains that marked his own fingers from his ongoing search for day labor. "I tried calling your office Monday morning, but..." I know. I was in meetings all week, and by the time I got your message, this seemed like a conversation better held in person. Victoria's gaze shifted to Emma, who stood slightly behind Marcus, studying the unexpected visitor with 8-year-old directness. You must be Emma, Victoria said, kneeling to Emma's eye level with surprising grace despite her expensive suit. I'm Victoria. Your father helped me very much earlier this week. Emma stepped forward with the social confidence that had always amazed Marcus, extending her small hand formally. It's nice to meet you, Miss Victoria. Daddy said you work in the tall building downtown. I do, and I heard from your father that you're very good at mathematics. I like math, Emma replied seriously. And reading, and science. Daddy helps me with homework every day, even when we're busy. Victoria glanced at Marcus, something shifting in her expression as she processed the implications of Emma's words, even when we're busy. The child's unconscious euphemism for their chaotic daily struggle to survive spoke volumes about how she had learned to frame their circumstances. That's wonderful, Victoria said, returning her attention to Emma. Education is very important. What's your favorite subject? Science, Emma answered without hesitation. I want to understand how things work, like why some medicines help people feel better, and how computers can solve problems, and why some buildings stay up even when they're really tall. She paused, then added with endearing seriousness, Daddy says if I study hard, I can be anything I want when I grow up. Marcus felt pride and heartbreak warring in his chest as he watched his daughter interact with Victoria. Emma's intelligence and maturity were evident in every response. But so was the premature wisdom that came from adapting to adult problems at an age when she should have been worried about homework and friendships rather than housing and health care. Your father is absolutely right, Victoria said, rising to face Marcus again. Mr. Williams, I wonder if we could speak privately for a few minutes? Emma, would you be comfortable sitting in the hallway with my assistant? She has some coloring books in her bag. Through the window, Marcus could see a professional-looking woman, in her 30s, waiting near the reception desk, a briefcase at her feet, and a genuine smile on her face as she observed the interaction. Can I, Daddy? Emma asked, already intrigued by the prospect of new activities. Marcus nodded, though every protective instinct urged him to keep Emma close. The shelter had taught him to be suspicious of unexpected kindness, but Victoria's manner suggested genuine intention rather than manipulation. When they were alone, Victoria settled back into her chair, her demeanor shifting from the gentle attention she had shown Emma to the focused intensity Marcus remembered from their first meeting. Mr. Williams, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I'd appreciate honest answers. All right. How long have you and Emma been homeless? The blunt question hit harder than Marcus had expected, though he should have anticipated it. Victoria's presence here meant she had already discovered the truth about their circumstances. 7 weeks, he said quietly. We lost our apartment when I couldn't make rent after my workers' compensation claim was denied. Victoria nodded, making notes on a legal pad she had withdrawn from her briefcase. And before that? Marcus told her the abbreviated version of their story: the construction accident, the mounting medical bills, the job loss, the gradual depletion of their savings, the impossible choice between housing and health care. Victoria listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious as she absorbed the details of their systematic slide from stability into crisis. Emma's mother? Victoria asked when he finished. Remarried and moved to Oregon. She sends child support sporadically, but she's not part of Emma's life anymore. So it's just you and Emma? Yes. Victoria set down her pen and leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes studying Marcus with the same intensity he remembered from their first encounter. Mr. Williams, what I'm about to discuss with you must remain completely confidential, regardless of your decision about my proposition. Do I have your word on that? Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Yes, you have my word. Chen Industries is facing a situation that requires someone with unshakable ethical standards to oversee a sensitive internal investigation. We've discovered irregularities in our overseas operations. Nothing criminal, but concerning enough to require immediate attention from someone I can trust, completely." Victoria paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "The position would be head of ethics and compliance, reporting directly to me. The person in this role would have access to confidential financial information, personnel files, and operational details that could be worth millions to our competitors. The salary would be $120,000 annually, plus full benefits, including comprehensive health care." Marcus stared at her, certain he had misunderstood something fundamental about what she was saying. "I'm sorry, what position?" "Head of Ethics and Compliance for Chen Industries." "Ms. Chen, I think there's been some misunderstanding. I'm a construction supervisor. I don't have corporate experience or business education. I don't even have appropriate clothes for an office environment." Victoria smiled, the expression transforming her serious features into something unexpectedly warm. "Mr. Williams, 3 days ago you returned $47,000 in cash that could have solved every problem in your life. You did it because your personal code of ethics made any other choice impossible. That kind of integrity can't be taught in business school or developed through corporate training." Marcus felt the familiar disorientation he had experienced in her office, the sense that they were operating by different rules of logic and possibility. "But the technical aspects of the job can be learned. I have excellent staff who can teach you corporate procedures, regulatory requirements, and administrative systems. What I can't teach, what I can't find in any resume or interview process, is the absolute moral certainty that drove you to return that wallet." Victoria reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder, placing it on the table between them. "The position comes with a full relocation package. Corporate housing for the first year while you establish credit and secure permanent residence. Educational assistance for Emma Private School if you prefer, with tutoring support to help her transition. Full family healthcare coverage, including retroactive treatment for any existing conditions." Marcus opened the folder with trembling hands, his eyes scanning documents that seemed to describe someone else's life. Employment contracts, salary information, benefit summaries, housing allowances numbers, and terms that existed in a different universe from his daily reality of shelter cots and food stamp calculations. "This is impossible," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why is it impossible?" "Because things like this don't happen to people like me. Because I'm homeless, living in a shelter with my 8-year-old daughter. Because I have a high school education and a damaged back and a bankruptcy filing that makes me unemployable for any position requiring financial responsibility." Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying him with something that might have been amusement. "Mr. Williams, let me tell you what I see when I look at you. I see a man who lost everything through circumstances largely beyond his control, but who has maintained his dignity and his values throughout the worst period of his life. I see a father who helps his daughter with mathematics homework in a homeless shelter while ensuring she believes in her own potential for the future." She gestured toward the window, where Emma could be seen sitting with Victoria's assistant, both of them absorbed in a coloring project. "I see a man who raised a child with enough confidence to introduce herself professionally to a stranger, enough intelligence to excel academically despite months of disruption, and enough emotional security to believe her father when he tells her she can be anything she wants." Marcus followed her gaze, watching Emma carefully select colored pencils with the same analytical approach she brought to mathematics problems. The sight of his daughter made his chest tighten with the familiar mixture of pride and protective anxiety that had defined his parenting since they had lost their stability. "Mr. Williams?" Victoria continued. "In my experience, a man's character is revealed most clearly not by how he behaves when life is easy, but by how he conducts himself when everything falls apart. Your character has been tested in ways that most people never experience, and you've emerged with your integrity intact." "But I've failed," Marcus said, the words coming out more harshly than he intended. "I couldn't provide for my daughter. I couldn't keep our home. I couldn't even keep her healthy without accepting charity from a stranger." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "Have you failed, Emma? Look at her, Mr. Williams. Really look at her. Does she seem like a child whose father has failed her? Marcus turned again toward the window, seeing Emma through Victoria's perspective. His daughter was animated and engaged, explaining something to Victoria's assistant with obvious enthusiasm. Despite their circumstances, despite the shelter and the uncertainty and the constant stress of their situation, Emma remained curious, confident, and fundamentally secure in her father's love and protection. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said quietly. "And she's extraordinary because of you, not despite your circumstances." The kind of parenting that produces a child like Emma doesn't happen by accident. It requires consistency, dedication, and values that remain steady, even when everything else is falling apart. Marcus felt tears threatening, overwhelmed by the idea that someone could see strength where he felt only failure. "I don't understand why you're offering me this opportunity." "Because integrity is the rarest commodity in corporate America," Victoria replied without hesitation. "I can hire brilliant analysts, experienced managers, and skilled negotiators. I can find people with impressive credentials and polished presentations. But I cannot hire the kind of absolute moral certainty that made you return that wallet." She pulled out another document, this one bearing the Chen Industries letterhead and multiple official signatures. "This is a formal job offer, Mr. Williams, starting Monday, if you accept. The relocation package includes immediate housinga, furnished 2-bedroom apartment in Midtown, walking distance from Emma's new school. Healthcare coverage begins immediately, with a referral to the best pediatric specialists in Atlanta for Emma's respiratory issues." Marcus stared at the documents, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what Victoria was proposing. "This is too much, too generous. There has to be something you're not telling me." Victoria laughed, the sound genuine and surprisingly warm in the sterile environment of the meeting room. "Mr. Williams, you've been living in survival mode for so long that generosity seems suspicious. This isn't charity, it's an investment. I'm betting that your character and integrity are worth more to my company than any traditional qualifications could be. And if you're wrong, if I can't learn the technical aspects of the job quickly enough, then I'll be wrong, and we'll figure out a different arrangement. But I don't think I'm wrong." Victoria stood, gathering her materials. "I'm going to leave these documents with you to review. Take the weekend to think about it. Discuss it with Emma if you want. Call me Monday morning with your decision." Marcus remained seated, staring at the folder that contained the possibility of transforming their lives completely. "Why haven't you asked about my background check, my credit history? References from previous employers?" "Because," Victoria said, pausing at the door, 3 days ago you gave me the only reference I need. When you voluntarily returned $47,000 that could have solved every problem in your life, you demonstrated character that no background check could measure." After Victoria left, Marcus sat alone in the meeting room for several minutes, trying to absorb what had just occurred. Through the window, he could see Emma playing with other children in the shelter's recreation area, her laughter audible even through the glass. She looked happy despite their circumstances, secure in the knowledge that her father would protect her and provide for her to the best of his ability. But this offer represented more than just provision. It offered the possibility of restoration. Not just housing and health care, but the kind of stable, prosperous life Marcus had once taken for granted. The opportunity for Emma to attend excellent schools, to have her own bedroom again, to think about college as an assumption rather than an impossible dream. The skeptical voice in his mind cataloged all the reasons the offer was too good to be true. Corporate executives didn't rescue homeless families from shelters. People didn't receive 120, zero-per-year positions based solely on the return of a lost wallet. There had to be hidden conditions, ulterior motives, or expectations that would prove impossible to meet. But the rational part of his mind recognized something else in Victoria's manner, and words the ring of genuine intention. She hadn't spoken like someone making empty promises or manipulating him for unclear purposes. She had presented her offer with the same straightforward directness she had shown during their first meeting, treating him as an equal, despite the obvious disparities in their circumstances. "Daddy?" Emma appeared in the doorway, her face bright with curiosity. "Victoria's assistant gave me these." She held up several children's books, clearly new and expensive. "She said they were from Ms. Victoria because she heard I liked to read." Marcus examined the book's quality publications from major publishers, age-appropriate but intellectually challenging. The gesture was thoughtful in a way that suggested Victoria had been paying careful attention to their conversation about Emma's academic interests. "That was very kind of her," Marcus said, helping Emma gather her new books. "What did you think of Miss Victoria?" Emma considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "I think she's nice and smart. She asked good questions about my favorite subjects, and she listened to my answers like they were important." She paused, then added, "She reminds me a little bit of Mrs. Patterson at the library. Like she cares about kids learning things." That evening, as Marcus helped Emma prepare for bed in their shared space at the shelter, he found himself studying the job offer documents by the dim light of the overhead fluorescents. The salary alone represented more money than he had made at the height of his construction career. The benefits package was comprehensive enough to address every worry that had kept him awake for months. "Daddy," Emma said, as she settled into her cot, "are we going to live here for a long time?" The question pierced him, as her innocent inquiries always did. "I hope not, sweetheart. I'm working on finding us a better place." "I know you are. You always take care of me." Emma yawned, already drowsy from the day's activities. "I like it when people are nice to us, like Miss Victoria today. It makes me remember that there are good people in the world." As Emma drifted toward sleep, Marcus continued reviewing the contract documents, his mind cycling between hope and disbelief. The position Victoria had described would not only solve their immediate crisis, but would establish the foundation for a completely different kind of future. Emma could attend the kind of school that would nurture her obvious intellectual gifts. They could live in a real home, with stability and security and the ordinary comforts that Marcus had stopped allowing himself to imagine. But accepting the offer required a leap of faith that felt almost impossible after months of disappointment and rejection. It required believing that his decision to return the wallet had genuinely impressed Victoria enough to overcome every traditional barrier to employment. It required trusting that someone he had met only twice was willing to invest in his potential rather than his credentials. Most challenging of all, it required accepting that he deserved such an opportunity, that his character and integrity were valuable enough to justify Victoria's extraordinary offer. As the shelter settled into its nighttime rhythm of whispered conversations and restless sleep, Marcus stared at the ceiling and allowed himself to imagine Monday morning in a different context. Instead of lining up for day labor jobs that might or might not materialize, he could be walking into the gleaming Chen Industries building as an employee. Instead of worrying about Emma's next meal or her worsening cough, he could be focused on learning the responsibilities of his new position. The fantasy was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. By Sunday evening, he would need to decide whether to trust Victoria's assessment of his worth and accept an opportunity that seemed too good to be real, or whether to decline and continue their struggle for survival on terms he understood, however difficult they might be. Either way, Marcus realized, Victoria Chen had already changed something fundamental about how he saw himself and Emma's future. For the first time in months, he was contemplating possibilities beyond mere survival. Whether or not he accepted her offer, she had reminded him that they deserved more than just getting by. They deserved the chance to build something better. The question now was whether he had the courage to believe her assessment was correct and to take the risk that could transform their lives completely. The midtown apartment that Victoria had arranged felt like stepping into a magazine photograph rather than a real place where people lived. Marcus stood in the living room doorway on their first morning, watching sunlight stream through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Piedmont Park, still unable to fully process that this space belonged to them, even temporarily. The furniture was contemporary but comfortable, arranged with the kind of tasteful precision that spoke of professional interior design rather than the accumulated chaos of most family homes. Emma emerged from her new bedroom, already dressed in the school uniform that had been delivered the previous even navy blazer, white shirt, plaid skirt, and Oxford shoes that were the finest footwear she had ever owned. She moved through the apartment with the adaptable confidence that had sustained her through their months of instability, but Marcus could see the wonder in her eyes as she took in details like the kitchen island that was larger than their entire sleeping space at the shelter. "Daddy, look," she said, pressing her face against the living room windows. "You can see the whole park from here. And there are people walking dogs and playing with their children." Marcus joined her at the window, marveling at the view that transformed their former world of parking lots and shelter dormitories into something that felt almost fictional. Below them, affluent Atlanta families moved through their morning routines with the casual ease of people who had never questioned whether they would have breakfast or a safe place to sleep. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Marcus agreed, though part of him felt like an imposter observing a life he didn't deserve to inhabit. Emma's first day at Westminster Academy had been arranged with the efficiency that seemed to characterize everything in Victoria's sphere of influence. The school's admissions director, Mrs. Hoffman, had personally conducted Emma's intake interview, expressing amazement at her academic level despite months of educational disruption. By noon, Emma had been placed in advanced mathematics and reading programs, with additional enrichment opportunities in science and technology. "She's remarkably well adjusted for a child who has experienced such significant instability," Mrs. Hoffman had told Marcus during their conference. "Her intellectual curiosity and emotional resilience are quite exceptional. We're excited to have her join our community." Marcus had nodded and smiled, accepting the compliments while internally marveling at how quickly Emma had transformed from a homeless shelter resident to a private school student. The transition that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier now felt natural, as though Emma had always belonged in environments that nurtured exceptional children. His own transformation proved more challenging. Monday morning, at Chen Industries, began with orientation sessions that introduced him to corporate systems, regulatory requirements, and the complex organizational structure of a multinational corporation. Sarah Martinez, Victoria's executive assistant, had assigned him a junior analyst named David Kim to serve as his guide through the initial learning process. "Don't worry about absorbing everything immediately," David assured him, as they reviewed compliance protocols in Marcus's new office space with windows, a conference table, and technology that still felt intimidatingly sophisticated. "Most people take months to understand the full scope of the ethics and compliance department." Marcus appreciated David's patience, but he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was waiting for him to reveal himself as fundamentally unsuited for corporate leadership. His office was located on the 38th floor, just 5 floors below Victoria's executive suite, with views that reminded him daily of how far he had traveled from his previous circumstances. The learning curve was steep and occasionally overwhelming. Marcus spent his first weeks absorbing information about international trade regulations, corporate governance standards, and the complex web of subsidiary companies that comprise Chen Industries' global operations. His lack of formal business education created gaps in his understanding that he worked desperately to fill through evening study sessions after Emma was asleep. "You're being too hard on yourself," Victoria told him during one of their weekly check-in meetings. She had made a point of scheduling regular sessions to monitor his progress and address any concerns, treating his success as a personal investment rather than a corporate obligation. "I missed 3 references in today's regulatory briefing that David had to explain afterward," Marcus replied, reviewing his notes with visible frustration. "And I still don't understand half the financial terminology in the quarterly reports." Victoria smiled with what appeared to be genuine amusement rather than condescension. "Marcus, 6 weeks ago you were living in a homeless shelter. The fact that you're participating meaningfully in regulatory briefings is remarkable, not inadequate." But Marcus's concerns went beyond technical knowledge. The other senior executives at Chen Industries maintained professional courtesy in his presence, but he could sense their skepticism about his qualifications and Victoria's decision to hire him. During staff meetings, conversations often referenced shared experiences from business school, previous corporate positions, or industry contacts that highlighted his outsider status. "The new ethics guy seems nice enough," Marcus overheard one department head telling another in the elevator. "But Victoria's really taking a risk with someone who has no relevant background. Good intentions don't necessarily translate to effective leadership." The comment stung because it reflected Marcus's own doubts about his ability to justify Victoria's faith in him. He worked longer hours than necessary, arrived early and stayed late, and prepared extensively for every meeting in an effort to compensate for his lack of traditional credentials. Emma adapted to his new schedule with the same grace she had shown throughout their ordeal, but Marcus worried that his obsessive focus on proving himself was creating a different kind of instability in her life. "Daddy, you work too much now," Emma observed one evening as Marcus reviewed compliance documents at their dining table while she completed homework assignments that were significantly more challenging than anything she had encountered in public school. "I want to do a good job," Marcus explained, looking up from his laptop. "Ms. Victoria gave us this opportunity, and I need to show that I deserve it." Emma considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "But you already showed that when you returned her wallet. She already knows you're good." The 8-year-old logic was both comforting and unsettling. Emma had absorbed the essentials of their situation with remarkable clarity, understanding that Victoria's trust was based on character rather than credentials. But Marcus struggled to maintain that perspective amid the daily challenges of learning corporate culture and proving his competence to colleagues who measured value in terms he was still learning to understand. Emma's adjustment to Westminster Academy proceeded with remarkable smoothness. Within a month, she had established friendships with classmates who accepted her presence without questioning her background or previous circumstances. Her teachers consistently praised her intellectual engagement and academic performance, noting that she often asked questions that revealed thinking beyond her grade level. Emma has an unusual combination of analytical ability and creative insight. Her mathematics teacher, Mr. Peterson, told Marcus during a parent conference. "She approaches problems from unexpected angles and isn't satisfied with surface-level understanding. We're considering advancement to the next grade level in several subjects." Marcus felt immense pride in Emma's success, but also growing anxiety about maintaining the lifestyle that made such opportunities possible. The corporate apartment, the private school tuition, the healthcare coverage, all of it depended on his continued employment at Chen Industries, which felt increasingly precarious as he struggled to establish his credibility among colleagues who questioned his qualifications. Victoria seemed to sense his concerns without requiring explicit discussion. She began including him in higher-level strategic meetings, where his perspective on ethical implications often provided insights that more experienced executives overlooked. During a discussion about potential expansion into Southeast Asian markets, Marcus raised questions about labor practices and environmental impact that hadn't been adequately addressed in the preliminary assessments. Those are exactly the kinds of considerations that make the ethics and compliance function essential, Victoria told the assembled executives after Marcus's presentation. "Technical feasibility and financial projections are meaningless if we compromise our values in the process." The meeting marked a turning point in how his colleagues perceived his contributions. Rather than someone who had been hired for sentimental reasons, Marcus began to be regarded as someone who brought valuable perspective to complex decisions. His questions were thoughtful rather than naive, his concerns were strategic rather than obstructionist, and his recommendations reflected deep consideration of long-term consequences rather than short-term expedients. 3 months into his tenure, Marcus faced the most significant test of his professional integrity since accepting the position. During a routine review of overseas operations, he discovered discrepancies in the financial reporting from Chen Industries' Vietnamese manufacturing facilities. The irregularities weren't immediately obvious. They required careful analysis of shipping manifests, production schedules, and cost allocations to identify patterns that suggested systematic manipulation. Marcus spent 2 weeks quietly investigating the anomalies, working with David Kim to trace financial flows and document their findings. What they discovered was a sophisticated scheme involving the facility's general manager, who had been inflating production costs and skimming the excess funds through shell companies registered in multiple jurisdictions. The financial impact was substantial, approximately $2.8 million over 18 months. But the ethical implications were even more serious. The scheme involved falsifying documents that were submitted to regulatory agencies in both Vietnam and the United States, creating potential legal liability that could affect Chen Industries' operating licenses and reputation. Marcus found himself facing a dilemma that tested every principle Victoria had identified as the foundation for his hiring. The evidence was clear, but exposing the scheme would implicate several people he had come to respect, including the regional operations director who had unknowingly signed off on the fraudulent reports. More significantly, the investigation would likely attract regulatory scrutiny that could disrupt operations and affect the employment of hundreds of legitimate workers. "What would you do?" Marcus asked David one evening as they reviewed their documentation in the privacy of Marcus's office. David, who had worked in corporate compliance for 6 years, understood the complexity of the situation. Honestly, most companies would quietly transfer the general manager, implement new oversight procedures, and hope the problem doesn't resurface. Full disclosure brings regulatory attention that could be worse than the original problem. Marcus spent that night reviewing their findings while Emma slept peacefully in her new bedroom, her homework completed, and her school clothes laid out for the next day. Their life had achieved a stability and comfort that would have seemed impossible during their months of struggle. Emma was thriving academically and socially, developing friendships and pursuing interests that required the kind of continuity their previous circumstances had made impossible. But Marcus knew that compromising his integrity to protect their new life would ultimately destroy the foundation on which it was built. Victoria had hired him specifically because she trusted his moral judgment, and failing that test would negate everything he had accomplished professionally. The next morning, Marcus requested a private meeting with Victoria to present his findings. She listened without interruption as he outlined the evidence, the financial impact, and the potential consequences of full disclosure. When he finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, studying the documentation with the focused intensity he had come to recognize as her approach to complex problems. "What do you recommend?" she asked finally. "Complete disclosure to relevant authorities, immediate termination of the employees involved, and full cooperation with any resulting investigations," Marcus replied without hesitation. "The financial loss is significant, but the legal and reputational risks of covering this up are far greater." Victoria nodded slowly. "You understand that this will likely trigger regulatory audits of our other overseas operations? That we'll face scrutiny that could affect our expansion plans and potentially cost us millions in additional compliance requirements?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you're recommending this course of action despite the potential negative consequences?" Marcus thought about Emma, about their apartment, about the private school that was nurturing her exceptional abilities. He thought about the colleagues who would face unemployment if regulatory penalties forced facility closures, and about the shareholders who would see their investment values decline. "Ma'am, 6 months ago you hired me because I returned a wallet containing $47,000 that could have solved every problem in my life. You said you needed someone with unshakable integrity to oversee sensitive situations. This is that situation." Victoria smiled, the expression transforming her serious features into something that seemed almost proud. "Write the report. Include your recommendations for immediate action and long-term reforms. I'll handle the regulatory disclosures personally." Marcus's comprehensive report on the Vietnamese operations fraud became a model for corporate ethics protocols that Chen Industries would implement across all international facilities. The financial recovery exceeded expectations. Authorities in both countries not only helped recover the stolen funds, but also identified additional irregularities that yielded an additional $1.2 million in restitution. More importantly, the company's voluntary disclosure and complete cooperation earned recognition from regulatory agencies as an example of exemplary corporate citizenship. Rather than facing penalties, Chen Industries was invited to participate in pilot programs for enhanced compliance monitoring that positioned the company as an industry leader in ethical business practices. Your decision to recommend full disclosure has saved us far more than the money we recovered, Victoria told Marcus during a staff meeting where his handling of the situation was presented as a case study for other executives. The regulatory relationships we've built through this process are worth tens of millions in future opportunities. The success of his first major ethics investigation established Marcus's credibility with even the most skeptical colleagues. Department heads who had questioned his qualifications now sought his input on sensitive matters, recognizing that his moral clarity provided value that traditional expertise couldn't replicate. "You were right about the character question," the chief financial officer admitted to Victoria after Marcus's presentation to the board of directors. "Technical skills can be taught, but the kind of judgment he showed in this situation is either there or it isn't." Emma's progress at Westminster Academy continued to exceed expectations. She was advanced to 5th grade mathematics despite being chronologically in 3rd grade, and her science teacher recommended her for a special enrichment program designed for exceptionally gifted students. More importantly, she had developed genuine friendships with classmates who valued her intelligence and kindness without knowing anything about her previous circumstances. "She's remarkable," Victoria observed during one of their family dinners, a monthly tradition that had evolved naturally as their professional relationship developed into something approaching friendship. "Her intellectual curiosity reminds me of myself at that age, but she has an emotional wisdom that I didn't develop until much later." Marcus watched Emma explaining a science project to Victoria with animated enthusiasm, marveling at how completely she had adapted to their transformed circumstances. The confident, articulate child describing complex scientific concepts bore little resemblance to the sick, worried girl who had waited in their car while he searched for day labor just months earlier. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, as Emma moved to the living room to show Victoria her latest art project. "For all of it, for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Victoria turned to face him, her expression serious but warm. "Marcus, I didn't transform you or Emma. I just provided an environment where your existing qualities could flourish. The integrity that made you return that wallet, the dedication that makes you the best ethics and compliance director this company has ever had, the love that created such an exceptional daughter, all of that was there before we met." As spring turned to summer, Marcus's first year at Chen Industries established him as an integral part of the senior leadership team. His recommendations shaped policy decisions affecting thousands of employees across multiple countries, and his ethical framework became the foundation for corporate governance standards that other companies sought to emulate. But more importantly, Emma had completed her first year at Westminster Academy with academic achievements that positioned her for advanced placement throughout her educational career. She had developed interests in robotics, environmental science, and international relations that reflected the kind of intellectual exploration only possible when basic needs were secure and education was viewed as opportunity rather than obligation. "Daddy," Emma said one evening as they walked through Piedmont Park near their apartment, "do you remember when we lived in the car, and I was worried we might never have a house again?" Marcus smiled, remembering that conversation during one of their most difficult periods. "I remember. I'm glad we waited for the right house instead of settling for just any house," Emma continued with the kind of philosophical insight that still surprised him. "This house led to my school, and your job, and Miss Victoria becoming our friend. Sometimes good things take longer, but they're better when they finally happen." As they watched the sunset paint the Atlanta skyline in shades of gold and orange, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them from homelessness to prosperity, from desperation to security. The transformation had required courage to trust Victoria's extraordinary offer, determination to master skills he had never imagined needing, and faith that his character was worth the investment she had made. But most importantly, it had required maintaining the integrity that had made the transformation possible in the first place. Every time his ethical standards had been tested, from the wallet on the street to the fraud, investigation choosing principle over expedience had ultimately created opportunities rather than obstacles. Emma was right about good things taking time to develop properly, but as Marcus watched his daughter planning her summer reading list with the confident assumption that her education would continue uninterrupted, he realized that the best transformations weren't just about changing circumstances, they were about discovering that the character necessary to deserve better circumstances had been there all along, waiting for the right opportunity to prove itself. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the 39th floor of Chen Industries as Marcus Williams stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows in his new office, watching the familiar rhythm of Atlanta's afternoon traffic 40 stories below. The nameplate on his door now read, Marcus Williams, Vice President of Ethics and Global Compliance, a title that still felt surreal despite the 18 months he had held the position. The office itself was nearly twice the size of his previous space, with a private conference room and enough seating for the expanded team he now supervised across 3 continents. Mr. Williams? David Kim appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand and wearing the expression of controlled urgency that had become familiar during their 2 years of working together. David had been promoted to Director of Compliance Operations, and their professional relationship had evolved into something approaching friendship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the ethical standards that defined their department. The quarterly review presentations are ready for your approval, David continued, and the Jakarta team is standing by for the video conference at 4. Also, your 3:30 appointment is here. James Morrison from the Transitional Housing Program. Marcus turned from the window, straightening his tie with movements that had become natural through 2 years of corporate leadership. The expensive suit, Italian leather shoes, and Rolex watch, a gift from Victoria to commemorate his first successful year, were no longer costumes he wore uncomfortably. They had become part of his professional identity, though he remained acutely aware of the journey that had brought him to this office. Send Mr. Morrison in, Marcus said, settling behind his desk as David departed. The weekly meetings with candidates from Atlanta's homeless services programs had become one of his most important responsibilities, though they weren't part of his official job description. 6 months earlier, Marcus had approached Victoria with a proposal to create an employment initiative specifically designed to give opportunities to people whose circumstances had eliminated them from traditional hiring processes. The Second Chance Employment Program, as it had become known within Chen Industries, represented Marcus's attempt to systematize the kind of opportunity Victoria had given him. Working with local shelters, job training programs, and social services agencies, the company identified individuals whose character and potential transcended their current circumstances, offering them entry-level positions with comprehensive support systems designed to ensure success. James Morrison entered the office with the careful posture Marcus recognized from his own early days, at Chen Industries, shoulders straight but tense, eyes alert but guarded, wearing clothes that were clean and pressed but obviously second-hand. At 38, James carried himself with the weathered dignity of someone who had learned to maintain self-respect despite circumstances that invited others to judge him as unsuccessful. Mr. Morrison, Marcus said, rising to shake hands and gesturing toward the comfortable seating area near the windows. Thank you for coming. I've reviewed your application and spoken with Mrs. Patterson at the Downtown Mission. She speaks very highly of your work ethic and leadership during your time there. James settled carefully into the chair, his eyes taking in the office's appointments with the kind of detailed assessment that came from learning to evaluate environments for opportunities and threats. Mr. Williams, I have to admit I don't completely understand why a company like this would be interested in hiring someone with my background. Marcus smiled, remembering asking Victoria an almost identical question 2 years earlier. Tell me about your background, Mr. Morrison. Not the circumstances that brought you to the mission, but your work experience and skills. For the next 20 minutes, James described 15 years as a restaurant manager, including oversight of staff scheduling, inventory management, and customer service operations. His downfall had come through a series of events that Marcus found painfully familiar: a heart attack, that led to medical bills, job loss due to extended recovery time, gradual depletion of savings, and eventual eviction when disability benefits proved insufficient to maintain housing costs. "I've been looking for work for 8 months," James concluded, his voice carrying the frustration of someone who had encountered the systematic barriers that prevented homeless individuals from accessing employment. "Most places won't even interview someone without a permanent address, and the ones that will assume I'm unreliable or have addiction issues." "Neither of which is true in your case," Marcus observed, having reviewed the comprehensive background reports that were part of the Second Chance program's evaluation process. "No, sir. I don't drink or use drugs, never have. I just got sick at the wrong time and didn't have enough savings to weather the crisis." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but encouraging. "Mr. Morrison, I'm prepared to offer you a position as Operations Coordinator in our Facilities Management Department. The starting salary is $48,000 annually, with full benefits including healthcare coverage. The position includes a housing allowance that will enable you to secure immediate apartment rental, and we have partnerships with local credit unions to help you reestablish financial stability." James stared at him for several seconds, his expression cycling through disbelief, hope, and cautious suspicion. "Mr. Williams, I appreciate the consideration, but that seems too generous for someone in my situation." "Mr. Morrison, let me tell you something about situations," Marcus replied, moving to his desk to retrieve a framed photograph. The image showed Marcus and Emma on their first day at Chen Industries, both wearing new clothes and carrying expressions of nervous excitement. "2 years ago, I was living in a homeless shelter with my 8-year-old daughter. I was offered an opportunity that seemed too generous for someone in my situation. The person who hired me said something I've never forgotten. She could teach skills, but she couldn't teach character." James examined the photograph, then looked back at Marcus with dawning recognition. "The story about returning the wallet, that was you. That was me. And the reason I can make this offer is because someone believed that character matters more than circumstances. Your references from the mission, your volunteer work organizing meal service, your consistent help with other residents that tells me everything I need to know about your character." By the end of the meeting, James Morrison had accepted the position and would start the following Monday with a comprehensive orientation program designed specifically for Second Chance employees. Marcus watched him leave with the same expression of cautious hope that Marcus remembered wearing during his first weeks at Chen Industries, understanding that the real work of transformation would begin after the paperwork was completed. The Second Chance Employment Program had become one of Chen Industries' most successful initiatives, both in terms of employee retention and community impact. 12 people had been hired through the program over 6 months, with 11 still successfully employed and advancing within their respective departments. More importantly, the program had attracted positive attention from other corporations, media coverage that positioned Chen Industries as a leader in corporate social responsibility, and recognition from civic organizations that translated into valuable business relationships. "Knock, knock!" Victoria's voice interrupted his thoughts as she appeared in his doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the relaxed smile that had become common during their interactions. "Thought you might need caffeine before the Jakarta call." Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully, noting that Victoria had prepared it exactly as he preferred, black with 1 sugar, a detail she had somehow memorized despite his never explicitly telling her. Their working relationship had evolved far beyond the formal boundaries of executive and subordinate into something that resembled genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the values that defined their approach to business. James Morrison accepted the operations coordinator position, Marcus reported, settling into one of the chairs near his conference table as Victoria took the seat across from him. "He starts Monday." "Excellent. David mentioned that his restaurant management experience is exactly what we need for the upcoming facility expansion. Sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places." Victoria sipped her coffee, studying Marcus with the kind of thoughtful expression that usually preceded important conversations. At 43, she had changed remarkably little over the 2 years Marcus had known her. though their relationship had allowed him to see beyond the controlled perfection of her professional persona to recognize the vulnerability and genuine warmth that drove her dedication to excellence. "Marcus, I want to talk to you about something," she said, setting down her cup with deliberate precision. "The board meeting next week will include discussion of our 5-year strategic plan, and your name is going to come up for advancement to Senior Vice President." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, though he had learned to maintain outward composure during important conversations. "I'm honored by the consideration, but I've only been VP for 18 months. Don't you think that's unusually fast advancement?" Victoria laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "Marcus, you've transformed our entire approach to corporate compliance. Created an employment program that's been featured in Harvard Business Review, and personally saved the company over $8 million through your oversight initiatives. Most people spend decades building that kind of track record." "I've had exceptional support and mentorship," Marcus replied, his natural inclination toward humility still operating despite his professional success. "You've had the same support available to every other executive in this company. The difference is what you've done with it." Victoria paused, her expression becoming more serious. "There's something else I want to discuss, something personal that I think will help you understand why your success means so much to me." Marcus waited, recognizing the tone that preceded Victoria's rare revelations about her background and motivations. "I've never told you much about my father," Victoria continued. "Beyond the basic facts about his death when I was 12. What I didn't mention is that for the last 2 years of his life, we were homeless." The statement hit Marcus with unexpected force, recontextualizing everything he understood about Victoria's background and her decision to hire him. "Homeless? My father had a heart attack when I was 10 that left him unable to work in the factory. We lost our apartment, then lived in our car for several months before moving into a shelter in San Francisco's Chinatown. My father was brilliant, spoke 4 languages, and had been an engineer in Taiwan, but his health problems and our circumstances made it impossible for him to find work that matched his abilities." Victoria's voice remained steady, but Marcus could see the emotion in her dark eyes as she continued. "He died of complications from diabetes in that shelter, surrounded by people who saw him as a failure rather than recognizing his intelligence and dignity. I was placed with relatives who could provide housing but had no understanding of his dreams for my education and success." Marcus absorbed this information, understanding now why his story had resonated so powerfully with Victoria, why she had been willing to take such an extraordinary risk on someone whose only qualification was demonstrated integrity. "I built this company partly to prove that circumstances don't define potential," Victoria said. "When I saw you return that wallet, when I met Emma and saw how you had maintained her confidence and intelligence despite everything you were going through, I saw my father. I saw the man he could have been if someone had been willing to look beyond his circumstances and recognize his character." "Victoria, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. You've already proven that my father's faith in the possibility of transformation was justified. Every time you succeed, every time the Second Chance program places someone in a position where they can rebuild their life, you're validating his belief that character and intelligence matter more than social position or financial resources." The conversation was interrupted by David's discreet knock, announcing the Jakarta video conference, but Marcus found himself unable to focus completely on the technical discussions about regulatory compliance in Southeast Asian markets. Victoria's revelation had reframed their entire relationship, helping him understand that his success represented more than professional advancement. It was validation of principles that had sustained her through her own journey, from poverty to prosperity. That evening, Marcus arrived home to their permanent residence, a 3-bedroom house in Virginia Highland that they had purchased 6 months earlier with a mortgage that reflected his stable employment and growing salary. The transition from corporate apartment to homeownership had felt like the final step in establishing their new life, giving Emma the kind of stability and permanence that allowed her to think of Atlanta as home rather than a temporary stopping place. Emma was in the kitchen when he arrived. wearing the uniform of Westminster Academy, but with an addition that always made him Smela laboratory safety pin that marked her participation in the school's advanced science program. At 10 years old, she had grown tall and confident, her academic achievements matched by the kind of social development that came from security and encouragement rather than worry about basic needs. "Daddy," she called, looking up from homework that appeared to involve complex mathematical equations. "Mrs. Henderson wants to talk to you about my science fair project. She thinks it's good enough to compete at the state level." Marcus kissed the top of her head, marveling as always at how completely she had flourished in environments that nurtured her obvious intellectual gifts. "What's the project about?" "Water purification systems for disaster relief," Emma replied seriously. "I'm designing a portable system that could help people in places where clean water isn't available. Mrs. Henderson says it shows real-world application of scientific principles for humanitarian purposes." The sophistication of Emma's interests continued to amaze Marcus, though he had learned to accept that his daughter possessed the kind of intellectual capability that required advanced educational opportunities to reach its potential. Westminster Academy had provided those opportunities, but more importantly, it had given Emma peer groups and mentors who encouraged her to think in terms of global impact rather than merely personal achievement. "That sounds fascinating, sweetheart. When is the science fair?" "Next month, but that's not the important part." Emma set down her pencil and turned to face him with the expression she wore when discussing something she considered significant. "Miss Victoria asked if I would introduce her at the company charity gala next week. She wants me to talk about how the Second Chance program helped our family and other families like ours." Marcus felt his chest tighten with pride and apprehension. The annual Chen Industries Charity Gala was a major social event that attracted Atlanta's business and political elite, raising funds for various community initiatives, including the expanded homeless services programs that Marcus had helped design. Emma's participation would mark her first public speaking engagement, but it would also require her to discuss their difficult past in front of hundreds of strangers. "How do you feel about that?" Marcus asked carefully. Emma considered the question with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "I think it's important for people to know that homeless families are just regular families who had problems they couldn't solve by themselves. Maybe if I tell our story, it will help them understand that we're not different from them, we just needed help." Her insight and maturity continued to astonish Marcus, though he recognized that her perspective had been shaped by experiences that most children her age never encountered. Emma understood poverty and instability, not as abstract concepts, but as lived realities that she had overcome through combination of family love, personal determination, and extraordinary opportunity. The Chen Industries Charity Gala was held at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, the same hotel where Marcus had once cleaned windows for spare change during their months of homelessness. As he and Emma walked through the elegant lobby toward the ballroom, Marcus couldn't help but remember standing outside these same glass doors, watching wealthy people attend events he could never have imagined being invited to participate in. Emma wore a navy blue dress that Victoria had helped select, her hair styled professionally but still maintaining the natural curls that framed her intelligent features. She carried herself with poise that seemed natural rather than rehearsed, greeting the other attendees with confident politeness when Victoria introduced them to various business leaders and civic officials. "She's remarkable," observed Dr. Patricia Hendricks, Westminster Academy's headmaster, as they watched Emma engage in conversation with the mayor about her science fair project. "Her combination of intellectual capability and emotional intelligence is quite rare, even among our most gifted students." Marcus nodded, still sometimes unable to believe that the confident, articulate young woman describing water purification technologies to municipal officials was the same sick child who had waited in their car while he searched for day labor just 2 years earlier. The evening's program began with Victoria's introduction of the various charitable initiatives that Chen Industries supported, including expanded funding for homeless services, job training programs, and educational scholarships for disadvantaged youth. When she called Emma to the podium, the ballroom fell silent with the kind of respectful attention usually reserved for major donors or political figures. Emma approached the microphone without visible nervousness, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of the hundreds of adults gathered in the ornate ballroom. She adjusted the microphone to her height with practiced ease, then looked out at the audience with the same direct gaze that had impressed Victoria during their first meeting. "Good evening," Emma began, her voice clear and confident. "My name is Emma Williams, and 2 years ago, my father and I were living in a homeless shelter." A murmur rippled through the audience, surprise evident on faces that clearly hadn't expected such directness from a 10-year-old speaker. "I want to tell you about my father," Emma continued, "because I think you should know what heroes look like in real life. When we lost our house and had to live in our car, my father made sure I still did my homework every night. When I got sick and we couldn't afford medicine, he found ways to help me feel better and never let me see how worried he was. When we had to stay at the shelter, he helped me understand that we were still a family and that our situation was temporary, not permanent." Marcus felt tears burning his eyes as Emma spoke with such clear-eyed honesty about their most difficult period. "But the most important thing my father taught me happened when he found a wallet with a lot of money in it. We really needed that money for food and medicine and a place to live. But my father returned the wallet to its owner because he said that's what honest people do, even when being honest is hard." Emma paused, looking directly at Victoria before continuing. "The woman who owned that wallet was Ms. Victoria Chen, and she hired my father because she said integrity was more important than anything else. That decision changed our lives, but it also changed other people's lives through the Second Chance Employment Program." Marcus watched the audience lean forward as Emma described the program's impact, her natural storytelling ability making abstract concepts personal and compelling. "Tonight, you're going to hear about programs that help homeless families and people who need job training and children who need educational opportunities," Emma said, building toward her conclusion. "These programs work because they're based on the same principle that brought my father and Miss Victoria together, that everyone deserves a chance to show their character and potential." She smiled, the expression transforming her serious features into something purely joyful. "My father is my hero, not because he's perfect, but because he never stopped believing that doing the right thing would eventually lead to good things happening. He was right. And I hope that after tonight, you'll help other families discover that he was right too." The applause was immediate and sustained, with many attendees rising to their feet in recognition of Emma's remarkable presentation. Marcus felt overwhelmed by pride and gratitude as he watched his daughter acknowledge the response with gracious confidence before returning to their table. "That was extraordinary," Victoria whispered as Emma settled beside them. "I've heard professional speakers with decades of experience who couldn't command an audience like that." Emma beamed at the compliment, but her attention quickly turned to Marcus. "Did I do okay, Daddy? Did I explain it right?" Marcus pulled her close, struggling to find words adequate to express what he felt. "You were perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect." Later that evening, as the gala concluded with record-breaking donations to the various charitable initiatives, Marcus stood on the hotel's balcony overlooking downtown Atlanta. The city lights stretched toward the horizon, encompassing the neighborhoods where they had struggled and the building where they had found their second chance. Victoria joined him, carrying 2 glasses of champagne and wearing the satisfied expression that followed successful fundraising events. $18 million, she reported, settling beside him at the balcony railing. The highest total in the gala's history. Emma's speech alone probably generated half of that. Marcus accepted the champagne, though his thoughts remained focused on the evening's deeper significance rather than its financial success. 2 years ago, I was cleaning windows on the street below, wondering how I was going to buy Emma's medicine. Tonight, she spoke to the most powerful people in Atlanta about the importance of helping families like ours. 2 years ago, you returned a wallet that contained more money than you'd seen in months, Victoria replied quietly. That single decision created everything that followed your job, Emma's education, the Second Chance program, tonight's success. One moment of absolute integrity changed hundreds of lives. Marcus nodded, understanding now that his decision that morning near the newspaper stand had been more than a personal choice. It had been a demonstration of the principles that make transformation possible not just for individuals but for entire communities. "Victoria," he said finally, "I still don't understand why you took such a risk on someone you'd just met." Victoria smiled, the expression carrying warmth and something that might have been sadness. "Marcus, when I was 12 years old, I watched my father die in a homeless shelter, surrounded by people who saw only his circumstances rather than his character. I promised myself that if I ever had the power to change that kind of injustice, I would use it." She raised her champagne glass, her voice carrying quiet conviction. "You gave me the chance to keep that promise. Your success, Emma's remarkable development, the 12 families who have been transformed through the Second Chance program, all of it proves that my father was right to believe in the possibility of redemption through recognition of character." As they stood together overlooking the city that had witnessed their journey from desperation to prosperity, Marcus reflected on the chain of events that had begun with a moral choice made on a busy street corner. The wallet he had returned had contained $47,000, but the integrity he had demonstrated had proven worth far more than money could measure. Inside the ballroom, Emma was engaged in animated conversation with other children whose families had benefited from Chen Industries' charitable initiatives, her natural leadership already evident as she organized them into plans for future community service projects. Watching her, Marcus realized that the most important transformation hadn't been his own professional success or their material prosperity. It had been Emma's development into someone who understood that privilege created responsibility, that success meant helping others achieve their own second chances. "Thank you," Marcus said to Victoria, the words carrying the weight of everything that had changed since that November morning when a homeless father had chosen integrity over immediate relief. "Thank you," Victoria replied, "for proving that character really can change the world, one honest decision at a time." As the evening wound down and they prepared to return to their home in Virginia Highland, Marcus carried with him the recognition that their story had come full circle. The desperate man who had returned a lost wallet had become someone who created opportunities for other desperate people to prove their worth. The sick child who had waited in a car while her father searched for work had become a confident young woman who could inspire hundreds of adults to support programs that would help other children in similar circumstances. Most importantly, the moment of integrity that had seemed to cost him everything had ultimately given him more than he could have imagined, not just material success, but the satisfaction of knowing that his character had become the foundation for changes that would outlast his own lifetime. Emma fell asleep in the car during the drive home, her head resting against Marcus's shoulder as Atlanta's lights gave way to the tree-lined streets of their neighborhood. As he carried her to her bedroom and tucked her in beneath covers that carried the scent of home rather than institutional laundry, Marcus understood that the true measure of their transformation wasn't wealth or status, it was the certainty that Emma would grow up believing that integrity was its own reward and that doing the right thing would always lead to outcomes worth the cost. The wallet had been returned, the lesson had been learned, the circle was complete.